The shovel struck the frozen earth with a hollow clang, and Mary Holt knew with every harsh scrape that she was not only burying her husband, she was burying her own heart. The winter wind lashed at her black veil, snapping it across her face. Like a whip, blinding her from the pine box being lowered into the grave, she clutched the wool shawl around her shoulders tighter, though no cloth in this world could shield her from the chill settling into her bones. The men of town stood in a silent half-circle, hats clutched against their chests, boots scuffing the hard dirt as if they wanted to finish quickly and return to warm stoves. The preacher's voice droned, but Mary heard none of it. To her, the world was muffled, as though she were listening from under the ground with John. Every word, every cough, every shifting bootstep felt distant, faint, unworthy of the weight of the moment. Her gaze fixed on the coffin, on the very box that held the man who had once filled every corner of her life with laughter, stubbornness, and love so fierce she thought it could outlast the endless prairie winds. John Holt had been more than a husband. He had been her anchor. Now the anchor was gone, and she felt herself drifting into a cold, endless sea. The final clump of earth struck the coffin lid with a dull, unforgiving thud. Mary's knees buckled, and she bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. "He's gone," she told herself, but the words felt unreal, like trying to grip smoke with her bare hands. Some kind soul, a neighbor whose face she couldn't see through her tears, offered to help her back to town, but she shook her head sharply. She wanted no escort, no pity. When the last spadeful of dirt was tossed over the grave, Mary turned and walked away without looking back, her boots crunching through the brittle grass, her veil fluttering behind her like the torn wing of a crow. Holt Ranch lay a mile east of town, perched on the edge of rolling pastures and shadowed by the distant Blue Rock Canyon. Once, Mary had loved returning home, watching smoke curl from the chimney, hearing John's whistle echo across the yard as he finished work in the barn. But tonight, as twilight bled red and purple across the horizon, the ranch seemed nothing more than a hollow shell. The door creaked when she pushed it open, the sound startling in its loneliness. Inside, the parlor was dark, the hearth cold, the smell of stale ashes lingering. Mary set down her shawl and gloves, and for a long time she simply stood there, staring at the empty chair where John had once sat with his boots kicked out, reading the newspaper aloud as if she couldn't see the words herself. She ran her hand along the mantel, her fingers catching on the rough wood. Dust clung to her fingertips. Everything felt wrong. Too quiet, too still, as if the house itself knew its master was gone. Mary sank into the rocking chair, burying her face in her hands. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. She tried to cry, but the tears seemed buried too deep. All she felt was a hollow ache, as if someone had reached into her chest and stolen the part of her that once knew how to live. Outside, a coyote howled across the frozen prairie, its call stretching, long and mournful beneath the moon. The sound pierced her like a blade, so raw and lonely it mirrored the silence inside her chest. She rose, shut the curtains, and tried to close out the night. But in the corners of the house, in the whispers of the wind against the shutters, she felt something watching, unseen by Mary. At the edge of the pines beyond her pasture, a rider sat astride a horse. His dark eyes glimmered in the moonlight, his long black hair stirred by the wind. His face was painted in ash and ochre, his chest bare despite the winter chill. He had watched her stand alone at the grave. He had watched her walk home with nothing but her sorrow for company. And though he did not speak, his gaze carried something more than curiosity. It carried recognition of pain, of loss, of a destiny not yet revealed. Mary Holt, thought she, had buried her heart in the ground that day. But the night carried a secret. And from the shadows the Apache warrior waited, his presence unknown, but his purpose certain. Her story was not finished. The Holt Ranch had always been alive with sound the bellow of cattle, the rhythm of John's boots across the porch, the easy hum of his whistle drifting from the barn. Now it lay in silence, broken only by the groan of loose shutters rattling against the wind. When Mary Holt rode back from the graveyard, she almost couldn't bear to dismount at the gate. The ranch looked like a place abandoned, though she had left it only that morning. She swung down stiffly, her black dress catching on the saddle horn. For a long moment she stood in the dirt yard, staring at the house. Its paint, once bright white, was weathered to gray. The barn sagged under years of storms, and the corral fence leaned like a drunkard. It wasn't just grief that weighed on her, it was the heavy truth that this place, which had been John's pride, now rested solely on her shoulders. Mary gathered her skirts and climbed the porch steps. The boards creaked beneath her boots. The front door stuck in the frame before groaning open, the sound echoing like a sigh. Inside, the air was stale, touched with the faint smell of wood smoke from fires long gone cold. The parlor was dim, light filtering only through a crack in the curtain. Dust clung to the mantel, where John's pipe still lay as if waiting for him. His coat, patched at the elbows, hung crooked on a peg by the door. Mary's chest tightened at the sight of it. She wanted to reach out, straighten it, press it to her face and breathe in what little of him lingered, but she couldn't. Her hands felt like stone. She crossed to the hearth, running her fingers over the cold iron grate. How many nights had John sat right there, telling her stories of wild cattle drives, of storms weathered, of foolish young ranch hands? She had laughed so hard her sides ached, secure in the belief that their lives stretched out ahead like the open prairie. Now the hearth was cold, the chair beside it empty, the laughter silenced. Mary sank into the rocking chair, the one John had built for her their first winter. It groaned under her weight, but the familiar rhythm of its movement offered no comfort. She stared at the blank wall until her vision blurred. In her lap, her hands twisted together, the fingers pale and restless. Her thoughts drifted to the town's advice: sell the ranch, Mary. You're a young woman yet. Go east. Find kin. Start over. She wanted to scream at them. They didn't understand. She couldn't sell the ranch. Every fence post, every beam of the barn carried John's sweat, John's laughter, John's life. To leave it behind would be to bury him a second time. Still, the silence was unbearable. Night after night, she lit no fire, let the rooms remain dark, and listened to the coyotes' lonely cries on the ridges. Sometimes she thought she heard John's voice in the wind, faint as a whisper, calling her name. Other nights, she dreamed. Dreams came sharp and strange, painted with firelight. John stood before her, reaching out a hand, his eyes filled with urgency. His lips moved, but she could never catch the words. And always behind him stood another figure. A man with long black hair, his face painted, half-shadowed. His gaze was fierce, yet there was sorrow in it, as though he bore burdens of his own. Mary woke from those dreams trembling, clutching the sheets, her heart pounding. On a pale morning when the horizon bled with the first wash of dawn, Mary heard it, the thunder of hooves. She rose from her chair on the porch where she had sat, sleepless, her eyes stinging from the cold. The sound rolled closer, deep and powerful, until it shook the frozen ground beneath her boots. Her first thought was bandits. The Holt Ranch, empty of its strong master, was a tempting prize for desperate men. Mary's hand tightened on the shotgun leaning against the doorframe. She lifted it, bracing it across her shoulder, every muscle taut. Out of the canyon came a rider. He cut a striking figure against the pale morning light. The horse was tall, black as coal, its mane streaming. The man atop it was unlike any she had seen in town. Bare-chested despite the chill, his skin was marked with painted symbols, his body adorned with tribal jewelry that caught the faint sunlight. His long black hair whipped behind him like a banner of midnight. He rode without hesitation, his dark eyes fixed straight on her as though he had known all along where she lived. Mary's breath hitched. Her finger hovered near the trigger of her shotgun, but she could not fire. The stranger slowed his horse at the gate, lifting one hand in peace, and though her heart beat furiously in her chest, something inside her whispered, this moment had been waiting for her. The rider reined in his black horse at the gate, the animal's breath steaming in the cold dawn. Mary Holt kept the shotgun braced against her shoulder, her heart pounding so loud she was certain he could hear it. The man sat tall in the saddle, bare-chested despite the bitter air, his skin bronzed and marked with painted symbols. Tribal jewelry, bone, turquoise, and copper hung against his chest, glinting with each movement. His long black hair, wild and unbound, framed a face carved with strength and shadow. He raised a hand, palm open. "I mean you no harm." Mary's voice cracked as she forced words past her fear. "You've got no right to ride up here like you own the land." "I do not own land," he said simply, his deep voice carrying the weight of earth and stone. "But I know danger when I see it, and I see it here." Mary's grip on the shotgun tightened. She didn't know whether to fire or to collapse. The way he looked at her, not with arrogance, not with pity, but with a kind of knowing unsettled her more than the weapon at her side. "What do you want?" she demanded, her breath rising in pale clouds. The warrior slid from his horse with a fluid grace, boots crunching against the frost. He moved to the gate, resting one broad hand on the top rail. Up close, Mary saw his eyes, dark, steady, and filled with something she couldn't name. Grief, perhaps, but older, deeper, worn like armor. "My name is Dakota," he said. "Your husband did not die the way they told you." The word struck her like a blow. She lowered the shotgun an inch, frowning. "What are you talking about?" "My John, he died of fever. I was here. I buried him myself." Dakota's gaze never wavered. Slowly, he reached into the leather bag slung across his shoulder and withdrew something small, dull silver catching the light. He placed it carefully on the fence post between them. Mary's breath caught in her throat. It was John's locket. The same locket she had clasped around his neck with trembling hands before the coffin was closed. She knew every curve, every worn edge of it. She had buried it with him. Her shotgun slipped from her hands, thudding against the porch. She staggered forward, clutching the locket in both palms. "How?" her voice broke. "How do you have this?" Dakota's jaw tightened. "Your husband's grave was opened, his rest disturbed. Men took what they wanted." Mary's stomach churned. She shook her head, refusing to believe it. No, I was there yesterday. The grave was whole, untouched." "Not any more," Dakota said softly. "They will come again. Not just for the dead, for you, for the land." Mary's knees weakened. She sank onto the porch steps, clutching the locket to her chest, trying to breathe. The image of John's grave torn apart filled her mind, and the ache of grief turned to a burning fury. Why would anyone desecrate him like that? Dakota crouched at the edge of the gate, his voice steady as stone. "Because men with greed see no difference between the living and the dead. They see only what they can take. Your husband fought them while he lived. That fight has not ended." Mary raised her tear-streaked face to him. "And why do you care? Why tell me this? You don't even know me." For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Dakota spoke, his voice low. "Because I, too, have buried people I love, and I know the pain of their rest being stolen." His hand curled into a fist against the rail. "Because no, one should stand alone in that kind of sorrow." Mary studied him, uncertain whether to trust this fierce stranger. Yet the locket's weight in her hands was undeniable proof. Something terrible had happened, something she would not have discovered alone. Takota straightened, his figure cutting against the pale horizon. "Come," he said, "I will show you." Mary stared at him, her mind racing. Every instinct told her not to follow a stranger into the wilderness. And yet another voice whispered, this man carried truth. However terrible, she rose slowly, her hand tightening on the locket. The shotgun lay forgotten at her feet. For the first time since John's burial, the numbness cracked. Grief, rage, and something else, an ember of defiance, burned inside her. "Show me," she said. Takota nodded once. He turned, mounted his horse in one smooth motion, and waited at the gate. Mary stepped down from the porch, her breath sharp. In the cold, her heart hammering. The ranch no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a battlefield waiting for dawn. The cemetery lay silent beneath the pale wash of moonlight, the air sharp with winter's bite. Mary's breath misted as she followed Takota along the narrow dirt path, the silver locket clutched tight in her hand, each crunch of her boots against. The frozen ground echoed too loudly in the stillness, making her feel like an intruder in a place sacred to grief. Her heart pounded with every step closer to John's grave. She had not wanted to come. Every part of her soul screamed against it, fearing what she might find. But the weight of the locket, the proof that something terrible had already happened, drove her on. Takota walked a few paces ahead, his broad shoulders gleaming faintly in the moonlight. His long black hair spilled down his back, stirring with each gust of wind. Tribal jewelry caught the dim light, glimmering like embers against his skin. He moved with a quiet certainty, as though he had walked this path many times before, though. Mary had never seen him near town or its graveyard. They reached the far end of the cemetery, where the fresh earth of John's grave still stood out against the older, weathered mounds. Mary's breath caught in her throat. Even from a distance, she saw that the soil was disturbed. The neat mound she had left days ago was torn open, the edges ragged, the dirt scattered as though clawed by desperate hands. Her legs gave way, and she stumbled forward, falling to her knees in the frozen grass. "No," her voice cracked, thin and broken. "No, please, God, no." Takota knelt beside her, his hand steadying her shoulder. "Be strong," he said, his voice low, unshaken. "But see the truth with your own eyes." Mary crawled forward, her black skirts dragging through the mud. The coffin lay half buried, its lid splintered, gaping open like the mouth of some desecrated beast. She reached inside with shaking hands, praying it was not as bad as it looked. But her fingers found nothing. No boots, no coat, no small keepsake she had placed inside with love and care. And worst of all, the locket was gone. She let out a sob that tore from the very depths of her soul, collapsing against the coffin side. "They robbed him," she gasped, her tears streaming hot against the cold night air. "They robbed my John." Even in death, they couldn't let him rest. Takota's jaw tightened, his expression grim. He looked out across the moonlit prairie, as if listening for something beyond her hearing. "These men," he said slowly, "they are not satisfied with land or cattle. They take what should never be touched. The belongings of the dead are sold, traded, as if memory and love were nothing but coin." Mary turned to him, her grief burning into fury. Why? Why would they do this? He fought so hard for this land, for this ranch, and now even his grave isn't safe. Takota met her gaze, his dark eyes fierce, because they believe widows are weak. They think you will leave, abandon the ranch, and make it easy for them to take. They believe no one will stand in their way. He paused, his hand tightening briefly on her shoulder. "But they are wrong." Mary stared at him, her tears still falling, her chest heaving. She had never felt so broken, yet never so aware of the fire kindling inside her. The helpless widow she had been at the graveside was giving way to something harder, sharper. Then what am I supposed to do? She whispered, her voice trembling. Dakota rose to his full height, looking down at her with the steadiness of a mountain. You fight, not alone, not as prey, but with strength, with knowledge, with me. The words hung in the cold night air, heavier than any oath. Mary wiped her tears with the back of her hand, staring into the broken coffin. The locket pressed cold against her palm, a reminder of what had been stolen and what still might be. Taken. For the first time since John's death, she felt something other than despair. She felt rage. She felt defiance. She felt the stirrings of a will to protect what remained. Her voice was raw but unshaken. Then teach me. Dakota's expression softened for the first time since she had met him. He extended his hand, and though every instinct told her not to trust a stranger, Mary placed her trembling fingers in his palm. His grip was firm, grounding, alive. They stood together by the desecrated grave, the widow and the warrior, bound. Not by blood or kinship, but by loss and by a fight that had only just begun. Above them, the coyotes howled again, but this time their cries sounded less like mourning and more like a warning. The fire crackled low in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the cabin's wooden walls. Margaret sat hunched forward in a rocking chair, her hands clenched around the silver locket as though it were the only thing keeping her. Tethered to the world. The storm outside beat against the window panes, howling like a chorus of ghosts. Across from her, tall Wolf sat cross-legged on the floor near the fire, his bare chest painted with symbols that gleamed in the orange glow. Tribal jewelry of bone and turquoise rested against his bronze skin, and his long black hair hung loose over his shoulders. Though he said nothing, his dark eyes studied her with quiet gravity, as though he were watching the pieces of her soul. Crack and shift, searching for how to mend them. Margaret's voice finally broke the silence. I buried my heart with him, she whispered, her words trembling in the firelight. When I put that coffin in the ground, I thought the rest of me should have gone down with it. And now, her voice faltered. Now you tell me he lives in your world, that he walks the plains with your ancestors. Do you realize how cruel that sounds to a woman who watched him lowered into the dirt? Tall Wolf did not flinch at her accusation. Instead, he leaned forward, the firelight sharpening the ridges of muscle across his chest. I do not bring cruelty, he said in his deep, steady voice. I bring truth. His body rests in the earth, but his spirit, he pressed his hand. Against his heart, his spirit runs free. He came to me in vision, with the hawk's wings and the wolf's cry. He spoke your name, Margaret. Her breath caught. It was one thing to hear talk of visions and spirits. It was another to hear her name pulled from the mouth of this man as though carried across the divide by her dead husband. She tightened her grip on the locket until her knuckles went white. You could have heard it anywhere, she muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. The whole town knew me as his wife. No, Tall Wolf said, shaking his head slowly. The hawk that guided me knew you. The wolf that howled knew you. They brought me to this house not by chance, but by command. Your husband's spirit asked me to protect you when the wind grew cold and the earth grew hungry. Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears. Protect her? What protection could she need when the only thing she longed for was already gone? Yet something in Tall Wolf's eyes, unyielding, calm, powerful, stirred a feeling she hadn't allowed herself since the funeral, the faintest flicker of safety. The storm outside suddenly boomed, rattling the shutters, and she startled. Tall Wolf rose in one fluid motion, towering over her. His shadow stretched across the cabin wall, his frame a mixture of strength and solemnity. You are not safe here alone, he said firmly. There are men who would take what you have. White men, desperate and cruel. They smell weakness in an empty ranch. Margaret's lips parted in protest, but then she remembered the rough voices she had heard weeks ago, drifting across her land from passing riders. They had laughed about widows, about land too large for one woman to defend. A cold dread sank into her stomach that her voice came low, barely audible. "And what would you have me do? Follow you? Leave this place?" Tall Wolf shook his head. His long hair caught the glow of the fire like strands of black silk. "No, this land is part of you. To leave it would be to bury yourself again. I will guard it with you if you allow it." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the relentless cry of the storm. Margaret studied him. This man who seemed to belong to another world yet stood here in hers like a bridge between despair and survival. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs, torn between fear of the unknown and a desperate yearning for anything that might tether her to life again. Finally, her hand relaxed around the locket. She held it out toward him, her fingers trembling. "If what you say is true, if my husband's spirit brought you here, then take this. Let him guide you. And if he truly sent you, then maybe, just maybe, I'll believe." Tall Wolf reached out, his strong fingers brushing hers as he closed his hand over the locket. The contact jolted her like lightning, a warmth sparking beneath her skin that had nothing to do with the fire. For the first time since she buried her husband, Margaret's heart did not feel entirely dead. The storm carried on through the night, rattling the shutters and moaning through the cracks of the cabin walls. Eliza had barely touched the food the warrior placed before her, a simple stew of beans and rabbit he had prepared with practiced hands. Her grief was too raw, too heavy. But hunger eventually gnawed through her sorrow, and she lifted the wooden spoon with trembling fingers. Each bite was warm, grounding, and strangely comforting. The warrior, his name she had not yet dared to ask, sat across from her, his broad shoulders illuminated by the glow of the fire. His long black hair fell loose down his back, and his chest, bare but adorned with strands of bone and turquoise, seemed carved from stone. The tribal jewelry caught the light as he moved, subtle reminders of the world he belonged to and the world she had never dared to touch. "You dig grave," he said finally, his voice low and steady, his accent thick but his meaning clear. His dark eyes bore into hers. Eliza's breath hitched. She gripped the locket in her hand until it bit into her palm. "I was burying my husband," she whispered. Her voice cracked at the edges, but she forced herself to continue. "He was everything. My heart, it lies with him." The warrior tilted his head slightly, studying her with the patience of someone who had listened to countless winds and watched countless nights pass in silence. "Your husband," he said slowly, "he fight?" She shook her head, her tears slipping free again. "He was a rancher. Hard-working kind, but the fever took him. I thought I buried him proper. Then you came," her voice faltered. She remembered the sight of the coffin, shattered, the earth disturbed. Her heart ripped apart a second time. The warrior's gaze softened just slightly. He nodded, as if acknowledging her pain was its own kind of truth. Then he touched his chest with a flat palm. "I am Nanton." The name hung between them like smoke. At last he was no longer a stranger. "Nanton," she repeated softly, almost as if testing whether her tongue was worthy of carrying the sound. He gave a single approving nod. Nantan leaned closer to the fire, his features painted in amber and shadow. "Your husband's spirit not gone," he said firmly. "Ground not hold him. He move. He wait." Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. She stared at him, half in fear, half in desperate hope. "What do you mean? Wait? How can you know?" He reached into a leather pouch tied at his side and drew out a small carved figure, an eagle with wings outstretched. He set it gently on the table between them. The carving was rough, but it carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. "People know signs," Nanton said. "Spirit call when wrong done. I see trail. I follow." He tapped the eagle with one finger. "Your man not rest. You feel it, too." Eliza wanted to protest, to dismiss his words as superstition. But the truth was, she had felt it. Each night since her husband's burial, she had woken to an emptiness so sharp it was as if the grave itself whispered her name. She had dismissed it as grief. Yet sitting across from Nanton, the hair on her arms rose, and the weight of the tea locket against her skin seemed to pulse with a strange heat. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "That your path not end in grave," Nanton said, his voice deep and uncheckable. "You must see. You must walk." Eliza shook her head, torn between terror and yearning. "Walk where?" "To what? He's gone, Nanton." "My husband is gone." But even as she spoke the words, she felt the tremor of doubt in her chest. Nanton leaned forward, his eyes fierce, alive with firelight and conviction. "Gone? No. His heart not gone, his spirit strong. He call for you." The storm outside thundered, rattling the walls, as if the very sky itself demanded she believe. Eliza pressed the locket to her lips, her tears spilling anew. For the first time since she laid her husband in the ground, she felt something other than grief. She felt a spark fearful, fragile, but undeniable. Hope. The dawn came quietly, brushing the world in a pale gold glow. The storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and fragrant with the scent of pine and wet soil. For the first time in months, Mary stepped outside her cabin and lifted her face to the rising sun. Her hands still trembled as they clutched the silver locket, but her chest no longer felt hollow. Something had shifted inside her, as though the weight of her grief had been met by a force stronger than despair. The Apache warrior stood a few paces away, silent as stone yet alive with presence. Bare-chested, the morning light glinted off his bronzed skin and the tribal jewelry that hung against his chest. His long black hair caught the wind, and his eyes, dark, steady, unyielding, watched her with the same intensity he had shown since the night he arrived. "Your heart is still beating," he said, his deep voice carrying the rhythm of certainty, as though spoken not to comfort, but as fact. Mary swallowed hard, her throat aching. "I thought it was buried with him." The warrior tilted his head, the eagle charm in his hand catching the sunlight. "It was buried in grief, not in death." He stepped closer, his presence like the earth itself, solid, immovable, eternal. "Your husband walks with the wind now. But you are still here. The earth has not finished with you." Tears blurred Mary's vision as she clutched the locket. She thought of Samuel's laugh, his hands, the way he had looked at her across their kitchen table. Memories still cut like knives, yet they no longer drowned her, they filled her. She realized, slowly, painfully, that Samuel would not want her chained to the grave, crumbling away like the headstones around her. The warrior placed the carved eagle in her palm, his calloused hand closing around hers. "This is the spirit of flight," he said. "It carries burdens skyward. It reminds us we are more than the earth beneath us." His eyes softened, just barely, but the shift was enough to make her breath catch. "Take it. Keep it. When you falter, remember that the sky is endless, and so too is your spirit." Mary clutched the eagle so tightly it dug into her skin. Yet instead of pain, she felt grounding like roots sinking into soil, like wings unfurling above her. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why help me?" The warrior stepped back, his long hair lifting in the breeze. "Because the earth called me here," he answered simply. "And because grief knows no boundary, yours, mine, they are the same." Silence stretched between them, heavy yet not suffocating. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, filled with respect, with an understanding that transcended language. Finally, Mary drew in a deep breath. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "but maybe I can learn to walk in it again." The warrior gave a single nod, solemn and proud. Then, without another word, he turned toward the tree line where the mist still clung to the earth. Mary's heart lurched as she realized he was leaving. She wanted to call out, to beg him to stay, but something held her back. This man was not hers to hold. He was a force of nature, a messenger, a bridge between what she had lost and what she could still become. His path was not hers, but his presence had changed her forever. As he vanished into the trees, the sun climbed higher, spilling warmth across the land. Mary pressed the eagle and locket together in her hands. One a reminder of what she had lost, the other of what she had gained. Her husband's memory was no longer a coffin that chained her heart to the earth. It was a lantern guiding her forward, and the Apache warrior, shirtless, strong, wild as the wind, had shown her how to carry it. For the first time since the funeral, Mary smiled. Not wide, not bright, but enough. Enough to remind her she was alive. Enough to remind her that love, even when buried, could rise again.